The Allied retreat after the fall of Tobruk and the subsequent defeat at Mersa finally ended at El Alamein, the site of not one but two significant desert battles in 1942. On the 1st of July, the action began as the German 90th Light Division encountered the 1st South African Division. 2 weeks later, the fighting was still going, and on the night of the 14th, the British attacked two Italian divisions on either side of El Ruweisat Ridge, 8 miles south of Alamein. Among the troops advancing were the men of the 2nd New Zealand Division on the western slopes of the ridge. In the thick of the action was Captain Charles Upham, already a V.C. recipient for his work in Crete the previous summer, and now a company commander with the 20th Battalion. Although he'd already been wounded twice, he stayed with his men for the main attack. Originally part of the reserve battalion for the assault on the ridge, he went forward himself after communications began to break down in order to report on the attack's progress. Armed with a captured Spandau, he ran into a number of German machine gun posts, but was able to return and make his report. Early the next morning, the reserve battalion was finally sent in, and was quickly taking heavy fire from tanks and machine gun posts. Captain Upham led his company in an attack on the two nearest enemy positions. As always, he led from the front, destroying a German tank and several guns himself with grenades. Although wounded again, a bullet through his elbow this time, he kept up the fight, bringing back some men who'd become isolated up forward and leading a defense against a heavy German counterattack. He was finally brought back to the aid post to have his wounds treated, but soon was back with his men. By this time, more German reinforcements had been sent in to aid the Italians, and the New Zealanders were under heavy fire all day. A final German attack overran Captain Upham and his company, by this point only 6 strong. For 3 months he was presumed dead, but in October his status as a prisoner was confirmed. In spite of captivity and wounds, he remained as tough as ever, repeatedly attempting to escape before being transferred to Colditz Castle in 1944. In April 1945, he was finally freed. Captain Upham was the third, and so far last man, to receive a bar to the Victoria Cross, and the only combat soldier to do so. The other two were army doctors in the First World War. King George VI always took a great interest in such things, and when the recommendation for the bar reached him, he famously asked Major General Kippenberger, who had himself commanded the 2nd New Zealand Division, if Captain Upham truly deserved this unusual honor. The reply was that he deserved it several times over, and the bar was gazetted in September 1945. On learning of the award, Captain Upham at first thought it was just a re-announcement of the V.C. from 1941. He received the cross itself from the king before returning to New Zealand, and the bar and an investiture in Christchurch in March 1946. He returned to sheep farming at Hunderley. The community had raised money to buy him a farm, but he turned it down and went to a scholarship instead for the children of veterans. Although he never fully recovered from his wartime wounds, and according to legend would not allow any German-made vehicle onto his farm, he lived on it until almost the end of his life, dying in Christchurch at 86 in 1994. Also in action on the 15th of July were the men of the 22nd New Zealand Battalion. At dawn that morning, they were attacked on 3 sides by German tanks. 26-year-old Sergeant Keith Elliott, having taken over command of his platoon, led them 300 yards to cover by a nearby ridge, taking a wound to the chest while doing so. Reforming his men, he led them to high ground 500 yards further away, where they came under further fire from mortars and machine guns. After locating the German positions, on his front and to his right, Sergeant Elliott sent one section to the right and personally led another in a 500-yard bayonet charge, capturing 4 machine gun nests and 50 German prisoners. Almost immediately afterward, his men began taking fire from another machine gun post. He attacked this and captured it too, this time alone, taking 15 more prisoners. By now he'd been wounded 4 times, but stayed with his men and kept up his defense of the position, taking only 1 casualty, whom he brought himself to the nearest advanced dressing station, and capturing 65 more prisoners before finally getting everyone back to the battalion. Sergeant Elliott already had had an eventful desert war even before this day, enduring both captivity and malaria over the previous months. He was commissioned in May 1943, but returned to New Zealand in July over risk of losing him. He briefly returned to farming after the war, before becoming an ordained minister. He worked for the rights of Maori, even threatening never to wear his VC again in 1960 over their exclusion from the All Blacks tour of South Africa, and walked the length of the country in 1977 to raise money for a new church. He finally retired in 1981, and died in 1989 at Lower Hutt.